Welcome to Silent Screams, where darkness, whispers, and terror await you. Are you ready to confront your fears? Story 1: The Ghost Ship of Blackwater Bay. The night was dense with fog as the ship, the Abernathy, sailed into Blackwater Bay. The crew, though seasoned and unshaken by many storms, felt an unsettling chill in the air. It was as if the water itself was watching them, waiting for something to happen. Captain Elias Grayson stood at the bow, his eyes scanning the horizon where nothing but the pale glow of the moon revealed the shadowy outlines of the cliffs. They had heard the rumors, stories of a ship that was never seen, only felt, floating in and out of the bay under the cloak of night. A ghost ship. But Grayson, ever the rational man, dismissed it as mere superstition. The wind howled around him, carrying with it a distant sound, faint, yet growing louder. A low hum, a whispering of voices. Grayson shuddered. He turned back to his crew. But before he could issue a command, the lookout's voice broke through the fog, sharp with panic. "Captain! A ship! Off the starboard!" Grayson's heart skipped. It was far too late for any other vessel to be out in these waters. He peered into the mist. And then he saw it, the Black Rose. An ancient sailing ship. Its sails dark against the moonlight. It was moving slowly, almost as if it were drifting rather than sailing. And that's when it happened. The eerie hum turned into a shrill wail. A chorus of whispers seemed to rise from the depths. The bay itself appeared to swallow the Abernathy, trapping it in place. Grayson's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, there was nothing. No wind. No movement. Just the bone-chilling silence. Then, the Black Rose began to move closer. But it wasn't a ship anymore. Not in the way Grayson understood ships. It was a specter. An entity of darkness. The crew was frozen, their eyes wide with fear as the ghost ship approached them. One by one, the crewmen began to vanish into the fog. Some screamed, their voices disappearing into the wind. Others were gone without a sound, as if they had never existed. Grayson, heart pounding in his chest, watched in horror as his men disappeared into the mist. The Black Rose had always been a mystery. Stories of its haunted legacy had been passed down from generation to generation. The ship, its sails tattered and its hull rotting, was said to be cursed, carrying the souls of those who had died at sea, unwilling to move on. Some said it was a pirate ship, lost in a battle centuries ago. Others whispered that it had been a merchant vessel, doomed by greed. No one knew the truth. But the legends had always been the same. Those who encountered the ghost ship were never seen again. And those who came too close to the bay would feel the pull of the water, compelled to board the Black Rose and sail into oblivion. Grayson, a man of reason, laughed off these tales. Yet, as the ship loomed larger in the mist, the stories took on a weight he could no longer ignore. The crew who remained on the Abernathy huddled in fear. No one dared to speak. Yet every man felt the same pull toward the ghostly ship. It was as if the fog itself was alive, consuming their thoughts, making them long to surrender to the ship's eerie allure. Grayson, realizing his men were starting to lose their resolve, ordered the anchor dropped and commanded the crew to prepare the lifeboats. But even as the men moved, something was wrong. The air thickened, and the waves stilled. There was no escape. "Get to the lifeboats," Grayson shouted, his voice strained with panic. But before anyone could move, A figure appeared at the edge of the deck. It was a man, pale and gaunt. His face like a death mask. His eyes were hollow, darkened as though they had never known life. "Leave this place, Captain," the figure rasped. "You are not meant to survive. None of us are." Grayson stumbled back. His legs weakened, and his mind struggled to comprehend what he was seeing. The figure stepped forward, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. "I was once like you," the figure whispered. "But now, I am part of the ship." A cold dread filled Grayson's chest. He could feel the pull of the ship growing stronger. The whispers of his crew members' names calling him toward the cursed vessel. Grayson stood frozen, unable to move as the ghostly figure reached for him. The crewmen, now visibly shaking, were no better off. They were drawn toward the Black Rose, their bodies swaying in a trance-like state. Grayson wanted to shout, to command them to resist. But his voice failed him. He felt the same pull, the same desire to join the crew of the Black Rose. "Please," Grayson muttered, his breath ragged, as if he could speak to the winds, to the sea itself. "Not this. Not like this." But it was too late. One by one, the remaining crew were pulled overboard, their bodies sinking into the dark waters. And in their place, as if they had never been, shadows began to rise from the depths. From the hull of the Black Rose, ghostly figures emerged, sailors from an era long past. Their eyes empty, their faces twisted with agony. They had all died here, in Blackwater Bay. And now they roamed the waters, waiting for new souls to join them in their eternal torment. Grayson turned to face the figure again. It was now standing at the edge of the ship, its hand outstretched. "Join us, Captain. There is no escape. The bay claims all who enter it." A deep, rumbling sound rose from the water, and suddenly the sea seemed to explode with force. The Abernathy creaked and groaned, as though its very timbers were being torn apart. Grayson felt the floor beneath him tremble. The bay had come alive, and it was dragging them all into its depths. The last thing Grayson saw before the ship was engulfed by the water was the figure's face, its expression twisted into a grotesque smile. Grayson awoke. But it was not to the familiar rocking of his ship. The world around him was completely still. The air was thick with the scent of saltwater. But the sky above was black, utterly devoid of stars or moonlight. The Abernathy was gone, and in its place was the haunting sight of the Black Rose, looming impossibly close. His crew, those few who had survived, were no longer with him. There was only silence, an oppressive silence that weighed on him. Grayson stumbled to his feet, looking around. The ship seemed to stretch on forever, and yet it was oddly compact, as if it had no true form. The crewmen he had seen earlier were now scattered around the deck, their bodies frozen in positions of agony. A whisper rose around him, a chorus of voices, pleading, begging for release. They were the voices of the dead, the souls trapped in the ship, unable to move on. Grayson's stomach churned as the whispers grew louder, more frantic. "Set me free," one voice pleaded. "End the curse." Grayson reached for his compass, the only thing he had left that could connect him to the world outside. But the needle spun wildly, showing no direction. He realized then that he was not in any world he knew. He was trapped in the realm of the ghost ship. Days, or perhaps weeks, passed. Time no longer made sense. Grayson wandered the decks of the Black Rose, searching for answers. Everywhere he went, he encountered ghostly figures, crew members who had once been like him, now trapped in the ship's cursed grip. Then, on the last night, when the whispers had grown deafening, Grayson finally understood the ship's purpose. It wasn't just a vessel for the dead, it was a prison. The souls on board were bound to it, endlessly replaying their final moments in an eternal loop. And now, Grayson was part of it, destined to join the crew of the Black Rose. He ran to the helm, the weight of the truth crashing down on him. His body felt heavy, as though the ship itself was absorbing him, pulling him deeper into its cursed embrace. And then, as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Grayson screamed, his voice echoing through the bay. But it was a scream no one would ever hear. He was trapped. The ghost ship had claimed him, and he would sail with it for eternity, lost in the endless mists of Blackwater Bay. To this day, sailors speak of the Black Rose, a ghost ship that drifts through Blackwater Bay, forever seeking new souls to join its cursed crew. Those who have seen it never live to tell the tale, and those who dare to sail too close to the bay often hear the eerie whispers of the lost souls, begging for release. But none ever answer, and none ever escape. Story 2: The Wailing Horizon. For decades, sailors have whispered about the ship that sails beyond the horizon, a ship that is never meant to be seen, yet continues to appear in the mists, with its silhouette hanging like a curse. But no one speaks of it openly. Some say it's a ghost ship, forever bound to the sea, its crew lost to time. Others claim it's a warning, an omen to those who dare venture too far into the unknown. I never believed in ghost ships, not until I saw the Eldritch Maiden. I joined the crew of the Morrigan's Fury on a routine trade mission to the islands near the Bermuda Triangle. The captain, a grizzled veteran named Darrow, warned us all to stay alert. There were rumors of strange disappearances, whispers of ships that sailed into the mist and never returned. But, as young men do, we laughed it off. We set sail on a clear day, the sea sparkling under the sun, the wind in our favor. The crew was experienced, and we made good time. But on the third night, the winds shifted, and a fog began to creep in from the horizon. It wasn't natural. It moved with purpose, enveloping the ship, pulling it toward the unknown. Darrow stood at the helm, his face grim. "Keep your eyes peeled," he muttered. "There's something in this fog. I can feel it." I remember the first time I saw the Eldritch Maiden. It wasn't a ship at first, it was a shadow in the mist. But it grew clearer with every passing moment. Its black sails tattered, the wood of its hull rotten and crumbling. The Eldritch Maiden drifted closer, as if it had been waiting for us. The crew was paralyzed by fear, some praying, others gripping their weapons, unsure of what to do. "Do not look away," Captain Darrow ordered, his voice hoarse. "Whatever you do, do not look away." But it was too late. I had already seen it. The pale faces staring back at me from the decks, empty eyes, mouths stretched in eternal screams. The crew of the Eldritch Maiden had not just died, they had been consumed by something far worse. We tried to steer clear of the Eldritch Maiden, but it followed us, moving in ways no ship should. It was as if the mist was its domain, and we were intruders. Captain Darrow ordered us to prepare for boarding. We would need to find out what had happened to the ship's crew. It had been abandoned for years, but there was no sign of the wreckage, no sign of struggle, no sign of decay. We anchored beside the cursed vessel. And I, along with 3 other men, boarded the Eldritch Maiden. The ship creaked under our weight, as if it had been waiting for us. The air was thick with an unnatural chill, and the deck was slick with something wet, something that didn't belong to the sea. The lower decks were silent. Too silent. As we made our way deeper, the air grew heavier, and the whispers started. At first, I thought it was the wind. But the closer we got to the captain's quarters, the louder they became. They were not in our heads. The whispers were real, and they were begging us to leave. I entered the captain's quarters last. The room was unlike anything I had ever seen. It was pristine, untouched by time. Yet the air was thick with an overwhelming sense of dread. At the far end of the room, I saw it, an ancient chest, covered in strange symbols. The whispers grew frantic. They screamed for us to turn back. But my curiosity got the better of me. I opened the chest. Inside was the captain's log, a journal that chronicled the final days of the Eldritch Maiden. As I read the pages, my heart sank. The ship had not been abandoned, it had been cursed. The crew had become unwilling participants in an ancient ritual. Their bodies preserved in death but their souls trapped forever in the fog. The last entry was chilling: "We are the Eldritch Maiden. We are the mist." We returned to the Morrigan's fury. But the Eldritch Maiden did not leave us. It lingered, always on the edge of our sight, emerging from the fog like a predator circling its prey. Each night, it grew closer, and the crew became more agitated. Men who had been stalwart became frantic, and we could no longer sleep without the fear of waking to find ourselves on that cursed ship. On the 5th night, I saw it, a figure standing at the bow of the Morrigan's fury, staring out into the fog. It was one of the men from the Eldritch Maiden. His eyes were wide, his mouth frozen in a silent scream. Before I could shout a warning, he vanished into the mist. The fog had claimed him, just as it had claimed the others. We knew what we had to do. The journal had spoken of a way to break the curse. But it was no easy task. We had to return to the Eldritch Maiden, confront whatever power had ensnared the ship, and destroy it at its source. But time was running out. The fog was closing in, and we were surrounded, with no choice but to fight. We made our way back to the Eldritch Maiden for the final time. The fog had thickened, and the ship seemed alive, as if it was drawing us in. The shadows on its deck moved with purpose, and the whispers now felt like a chorus of voices calling out to us. Some of the crew turned back, terrified by the horrors they had witnessed. But I couldn't leave, not now. We boarded the ship, and as we descended into the lower decks, the mist seemed to press in around us. The whispering grew deafening, and I knew, deep down, that we weren't alone. The crew was still there, their souls trapped in the ship's decaying hull. And they were not content to simply watch. They were hungry. We reached the captain's quarters once again. But this time, there was no chest. There was only the figure of the captain himself, his skeletal hand outstretched, his hollow eyes locking with mine. "Leave," he whispered, his voice like the creak of a dying ship. "Or join us." Before I could react, the ship groaned and shuddered. The mist rose like a wall, surrounding us, trapping us within its folds. I felt a cold, clammy hand grasp my wrist. I turned to see one of my crew members, his eyes wide with terror, his lips mouthing something I couldn't hear. The ship rocked violently, and I stumbled backward, The eldritch maiden had become the very thing it sought to claim, alive and hungry. As the fog pressed in, I realized there was no escape. The eldritch maiden would never let go. Once you entered its grip, you became part of it forever. I woke up on the deck of the Morrigan's Fury. The fog gone. The ship eerily silent. The crew had vanished. And the sea was calm. But I knew the truth. The eldritch maiden had claimed us all. I am the last one left, alone in the fog. Forever. Story 3, The Ghost Ship of the Blackwater Sea. The Blackwater Sea was a place whispered about in port towns. A name spoken with fear and awe. For decades, sailors, fishermen, and even the most seasoned mariners had vanished without a trace in its waters. No storms. No wrecks. No remnants. Only the eerie silence that followed them. Like a shadow. The locals spoke of a ship that had never been seen, but whose presence was undeniable. It was known as the Harbinger. For years, the ship was nothing more than a ghost story to the young men who dreamed of adventure on the high seas. But when a group of sailors from the harbor decided to take on the task of unraveling the mystery, they set sail with more than just curiosity. They sailed with hope. Aboard the St. Gabriel, Captain Edward Moore was a man of reason. A practical leader who scoffed at superstition. The crew, however, was a different matter. Most of them had heard the stories, but they believed in the hard truth of wind and wave. Among them was a young deckhand, Samuel Green, who had grown up hearing the tales of the Harbinger, but dismissed them as fantasy. Until now. The journey was uneventful for the first few days. But something hung in the air. Something Samuel couldn't shake. It was as if the very sea beneath them held its breath, waiting for something. The crew spoke little during the nights, and those who did spoke in hushed tones. Then, on the 5th day, as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, a chilling fog descended upon the ship. It was thick, and the world around them vanished into white. The waves grew unnaturally calm, almost still. But the air was electric, charged with an unsettling presence. "Keep the course steady," Captain Moore shouted, though his voice trembled slightly. "Don't let the fog trick you. Stay focused." But no one could escape the growing sense of dread. The ship groaned beneath them, as if protesting the unnatural stillness. Samuel, standing at the bow, felt something brush against his skin, like cold fingers. He turned quickly, but saw nothing. The fog had thickened, and with it came the distinct sound of creaking wood. And then, they heard it. The haunting wail of a bell, a ship's bell, far in the distance, tolling through the fog. It wasn't like any bell the crew had ever heard. Its tone was mournful, and it seemed to echo from all directions at once. "Steady, men," Captain Moore called again. But his voice lacked conviction. The fog had become too dense to see more than a few feet ahead. It wasn't until the tolling stopped that they saw it, emerging from the mist like a phantom from the abyss. The ship was massive, its sails blackened with age, and its hull so silent that it almost seemed unreal. The Harbinger. A collective shiver ran through the crew, and even Captain Moore felt his hands tremble. It can't be. But it was. The ghost ship had materialized before them, as if summoned by the very fog that cloaked the sea. There were no lights on deck. No movement, nothing to suggest it was a ship of the living. The sails hung limp, but the ship glided closer with an eerie grace. "What do we do?" Captain?" Samuel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We turn back," Moore said, though it sounded more like a suggestion than an order. But it was too late. The Harbinger was upon them. As the two ships drew closer, the fog seemed to part, revealing the Harbinger in all its terrifying detail. The masts were gnarled, as if twisted by time itself, and the sails were so dark they absorbed the very light around them. The ship's hull was scarred with what looked like burns, blackened and weathered beyond recognition. There were no crew members visible. Not a single soul moved on its deck. But the strangest thing of all was the bell. The tolling bell that had stopped only moments before now began to sound again, echoing from the depths of the ship. The sound sent chills down Samuel's spine. It was as if the bell was calling them, beckoning them closer. "We must go aboard," Captain Moore finally said, his voice grim. "I don't know what this is, but we cannot leave it here." Reluctantly, the crew lowered a small rowboat and began the journey to the Harbinger. As they rowed closer, Samuel felt an icy chill crawl up his spine. The air grew thicker, heavier, as if the weight of the sea itself was bearing down on them. He looked back at the St. Gabriel, now fading into the mist, and suddenly felt a pang of fear. What if they were the last to leave? As the boat scraped against the side of the ghost ship, Moore was the first to step onto the rotting deck. The wood beneath his boots creaked loudly, and the sound echoed through the empty air. The crew followed, their eyes darting nervously, but none dared speak. There was no sign of life aboard the ship. The deck was covered in moss and mildew, the ropes frayed and tangled. Yet, the bell continued its toll, growing louder with each passing second. And then, as if by some unspoken command, the fog thickened once more, and the world became shrouded in darkness. The crew scattered, searching the decks, looking for anything that might explain the ship's mysterious appearance. But all they found were remnants of a life long gone. It was as if the Harbinger had been abandoned centuries ago. Yet it floated upon the waters as if time itself had ceased to matter. Samuel wandered towards the captain's quarters, drawn by a sense of dread that gnawed at him. Inside, he found a dusty journal, its pages yellowed with age. The handwriting inside was shaky, and the ink was smeared in places. But the words were clear. "The bell tolls for those who are lost. The ship will never rest until it has claimed them all. The dead will always return, and the sea will always take them back." Samuel dropped the journal, his heart pounding. He turned to leave. But as he did, he saw something in the doorway, a figure, standing in the shadows. Its face was pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through him. The figure whispered in a voice that was nothing but a rasping breath, "You should have never come." Suddenly, the ship groaned and shuddered. The crew, who had been scattered throughout the ship, began to shout in panic as the decks beneath them twisted and warped. The bell rang louder, faster, and the mists began to churn violently. The ship seemed to be alive, thrashing in the water as if trying to free itself from some unseen force. Samuel rushed back to the deck, his heart racing. The crew was in chaos, with some of the men desperately trying to escape, while others screamed at the sky, begging for mercy. And then, through the mist, he saw them. The crew of the Harbinger. The sailors were pale, their eyes vacant, their bodies twisted and broken as if they had been trapped aboard the ship for centuries. They moved like marionettes, their limbs jerking unnaturally as they climbed the ropes and walked the deck. One of them, a man with a gaping wound across his throat, reached out for Samuel. "We are all bound to the bell," he rasped, his voice hoarse and cold. "It calls us home, but we can never leave." As the fog thickened once more, Samuel felt his breath catch in his throat. The ship's bell tolled one final time, and everything went silent. When he opened his eyes, he was back on the St. Gabriel. The fog cleared, and the ghost ship was gone. But it was too late. The St. Gabriel was no longer a living vessel. It, too, had become part of the cursed fleet. And in the distance, the tolling bell could still be heard, echoing across the Blackwater Sea. The story of the Harbinger would never end. The crew of the St. Gabriel would sail forever, trapped on a ghost ship of their own, destined to become part of the legend.